All right. We're going to preview VCU and North Carolina. For this one, I am joined by Zach Joachim of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Zach, thank you for joining me.
Tyler, what's up, my friend? It is always a privilege, and as we discussed on Sunday after the A10 final, I am honored, distinguished to be a part of the nine-time club, right? And getting the three bid league quarter zip from you. So thank you so much for that. I was rocking it in the airport on the way back to Richmond.
I think this might only count as half an appearance, though, because we are doing this jointly. This is a simulcast across the Three Bid League and Up the Coast podcast here. We're going to switch up the typical team preview here. Normally, I bring in an expert guest and just kind of have them go through the simple stuff, but I'm going to hope that my own knowledge of these two teams can supplement a little bit here. I'll be playing the role of the North Carolina guy, partially because my first choice Carolina man had a scheduling conflict. So I'm gonna just do it. We'll go back and forth, just try to hammer out the keys to the game here and just see where it leads. But Zach, because we did talk about it briefly when we were doing the VCU recap on Sunday, and I know you've been doing some North Carolina research as well. What have you kind of fallen into as being the number one key to this game?
I think it's the Djokovic and Vesar. Is that how you say his last
Basar.
name? Henri Vesar. I think it's that matchup between those two guys because I don't think either team has like a really obvious, second body that you can put on the 7 footers down there. Djokovic is 6'11". But those guys have been key to these teams' success this year. And obviously Vesar has stepped up with Caleb Wilson out. And so I think a lot of what VCU fans and reporters have been trying to figure out is what does this North Carolina team look like without Wilson out there? Obviously, he's a top tier NBA draft prospect, broke his thumb dunking during practice on March 5th, and he's out for the postseason. Now, they've played some decent stretches without him this year, so it's not totally new for them to be figuring out how to play without their star player, but he led them in pretty much every statistical category this year in points, rebounds. I think it's the only statistic he didn't is assists. Blocks, he was up there too. And so it seems to me like Veystar has really stepped up since he went down and that he's the focal point for them. Interesting stuff from Lazar Djokovic. Obviously, he's Serbian and Veystar is Estonian. And so a lot of those Euroball guys are familiar with one another. And Djokovic said like he knew of him coming up and Veystar played at Real Madrid, obviously a huge club over in Europe before. And so he already had prior familiarity with his game before starting to study him in these next couple of days. But that's the matchup that I'm pointing to, man, and getting into like the nuts and bolts of how they match up against one another. Bayshar shot 42% from three on the season, so he can really stretch the floor. Djokovic is pretty good from outside as well, not nearly that clip. I think he was in the high 30s. And he'll pick and choose his spots to shoot it from outside. But he led the A10 in free throw attempts on the season with 206. He's excelled at getting the line all year for VCU and hit some clutch free throws late in that win over Dayton. And so I think if there's a path to victory for me for VCU in that matchup is it's Djokovic trying to go at him in the paint early and maybe get him in foul trouble because UNC has leaned on him so much and it seems like they could be disrupted significantly offensively if he's off the floor. And I think Bashar shoots 62% from three. I looked at KenPom earlier. UNC is not a good free throw shooting team. They're like 315th in the country. And so if VCU can make this a physical kind of ugly game it'll depend a little bit on how it's called with the officials. Like I think if this game is called pretty tight, then that would really behoove VCU because they're the better free throw shooting team. They're 15th in the country in free throw rate. And so they've excelled at getting there all year. And so I think that would be one of just looking at these teams on paper. That's one of the clearest routes for VCU is for Djokovic to try and get Ashar in foul trouble early, and for the Rams to muddy this game up, make it physical, try and use their depth and their free throw shooting, to make it kind of an ugly game and get to the line at a high clip.
So that's my number one. And you also hit on one of my others kind of unknowingly during that in one of your stats there. It's what does VCU do with Vasar? They have not faced a guy anywhere like this all season. I think the closest comp is Robbie Avila over at St. Louis, a very similar body type player, incredibly skilled big. Now, Avila a little bit more perimeter oriented. Vasar can operate on the perimeter, just a far more physical, powerful low post force, though. And I'm just not sure that VCU has the right guy to handle both elements of that. I mean, Djokovic can obviously body him up, but I think Michael Bell's going to struggle against him in the post. And Djokovic unquestionably does not have the quickness to deal with him off the bounce. And this is the kind of game where and we might have to see Keyshawn Mitchell a little bit for VCU just to give Vasar a different look. On the other end, you mentioned the fouling. This is a North Carolina team that's top 10 in the nation in not sending their opponents to the free throw line. The big reason they just don't commit many fouls on the floor. Those guards are so good at not getting handsy. They're not going to let you draw those little ticky tack on the perimeter fouls. It keeps teams out of the bonus. And then Wilson was spectacular at never fouling guys. Their one weak spot is Vasar. He's the only guy on this team who is prone to kind of getting himself into foul trouble, but for a VCU team that is so reliant on going to the free throw line, and think back to that A-10 championship game at those last 9 minutes where they couldn't make a field goal. North Carolina is just not going to put them in a position for a Terrence Hill or a Nick Lewis or a Jadrian Tracy to get themselves cheap points at the line the back end of halves.
And Wilson was leading them in blocks too at 1.4 per game. And then Vashar is their second. He's got 1.2, right? So, I mean, in terms of rim protectors, like after that, Jaron Stevenson is at point 0.7. Like Vashar is their best rim protector. And so I think that's another, element of it that points to if VCU getting him in foul trouble, it can really change the complexion of this game because then you get your rim protector out of there. You would think that opens up some driving lanes. And to your point, that seems like because Djokovic has been so strong at getting there all year, that maybe VCU tries to play through him early in this game and make Vashar play defense. Because getting him off the floor would be huge for VCU, man. And I'm with you. I think Michael Bell's a great defender. Like his versatility on the perimeter was huge for VCU in the A-10 tournament. This is not a good matchup for him. And maybe VCU does go to Keyshawn Mitchell a little bit, who's played sparingly for stretches of this year, but it's just another, 6'10" body that you can throw down there. He's a pretty wiry guy. Like he's one of those bigs that came up as a guard and has good perimeter skills, but has some work to do just in terms of filling out his frame. And I think he would struggle to bump around with Vashar down low. But that's the kind of guy that you can throw out there for 10, 15 minutes of this game just to be a body and to pick up fouls. And that's okay because you're not worried if he's off the floor and to spell Djokovic a little bit if you need to. Because Djokovic isn't a perfect matchup for Vashar, but there's just not another guy that VCU can go to, who's got the size and strength to bump around with him down low. So that's the matchup I'm looking at, man. And I had a fun anecdote from Phil Martelli earlier today because Duke is playing in Greenville earlier in the day, right? And Greenville's about 6 hours from Richmond. We did the drive down here yesterday. It's about 4 hours from Chapel Hill. So Carolina, obviously an enormous brand, great fan base. Like they're going to travel well. VCU is going to travel well too from this game. There's a lot of VCU fans hoping that there'll be plenty of Duke fans who come, to the second game, like after they play Siena earlier in the day. I think it's a separate ticket. So like you have to go out and get another ticket. But with how much Duke hates North Carolina, maybe some of those fans are gonna, want to stay for the rest of the day and turn in their Duke blue for some black and gold and cheer on the Rams. And we asked Phil Martelli about that. And he talked about so in 2003, when he's a senior at St. Joseph's, they get a number 10 seed in the NCAA tournament, and they're going to play number 7 Auburn. And he said, like, right after the matchup was announced and before St. Joseph's assistants got back to their office, Alabama had, like, faxed over all of their scouting report that they had on Auburn. And so they were trying to help them out, as much as they could against their rivals. I don't believe that Duke has faxed over any scouting reports, but obviously those rivalries run deep. And so I'm sure there will be a lot of Blue Devils fans, and VCU is hoping that could even it out. And if the Duke fans in there are cheering for VCU, then maybe we get a pretty split arena that seats about 15,000 with the Greenville Swamp Rabbits, which is just a phenomenal mascot. I've been enjoying that this week too. It's a minor league hockey team. It's also Furman's home arena, and it was really cool being in there earlier. And I'm excited to see what it looks like tomorrow.
Yeah, nobody does good old fashioned hate like Duke fans, other than probably the UConn fans. I think that's the one where if they had a chance to go root against like Providence or St. John's, they would absolutely fill the place just to boo their rivals. But one of the things I'm wondering about here is what Carolina's going to get in terms of wing scoring in this game. Seth Trimble is probably going to have to work his ass off in this game because he's basically the only person who can viably try to guard Terrence Hill. But at the same time, I'm assuming VCU is going to throw Brandon Jennings on him on the other end,
Mhm.
and he is just going to have to work all the way through this game. The one guy that VCU doesn't have a proper matchup for is Luka Bogovac. Just this bigger wing, a guy who is an incredibly streaky scorer, but it's, I guess, like Barry Evans that you might have to go big and play Evans and Bell at the 3 and 4 at
Yeah.
certain times, but at the same time, Bogovac also made 1 3 in his last 4 games, and it comes and goes so aggressively for him after he was awesome in February, had his best shooting run of the entire season. He's been ice cold as of late.
I would be interested too to see if Phil will go to some bigger lineups and play Lazar, Barry, and Bell all out there at the same time because he's kind of done the opposite. Like in the like when VCU's been playing their best ball like over the course of the season, he's done a lot of Bell at the five lineups. With them kind of going slower, that worked to great effect against St. Joseph's with pulling a Jagbor away from the basket. But I don't think this matchup lends itself to that. To your point, I think it lends it to the opposite with him maybe going a little bigger. And then that begs the question, what do you do with the guard rotations? This mean this isn't exactly like a Tyrell Ward or Jadrian Tracy game, and you've just got two of Hill Jennings or Nick Lewis out there at the same time. Another fascinating aspect that I've been wondering about is the pace. Because it's two teams that like Phil said North Carolina will get out and run when the opportunity is there for them. But according to like the Ken Palm, the tempo VCU is what are they? They're like 115 in the country in tempo, and North Carolina, here it is, yeah. VCU is 116th in adjusted tempo, and North Carolina is where'd it go? 144. So like the numbers tell you that VCU wants to run a little more than UNC does. But I'm not sure. What do you think favors North Carolina or VCU? Is it a slower paced game, or is there one of these teams that really wants to get out and run in this matchup?
I'm not sure it matters in this one. I feel like
Yeah.
it's going to depend on how teams are getting out and running. I mean, North Carolina, for a defense that never forces turnovers, I think they're going to struggle to do so in this one too. I think it's probably just a wash, honestly, because VCU's
And
not going to give
VCU
Carolina the ball.
And VCU, who's been good at taking care of the ball of late, right? And yeah, I'm looking at their metrics right now. 344th nationally in defensive turnover percentage. Like that's wild. 333rd in non-steal turnover percentage. 317th in steal percentage. Like they do not turn people over a great deal. And the other thing that I've seen people point to as well, they're 216th in three-point defense. Like opposing teams are shooting 34.5% against them. So they can give it up from outside. And it's a VCU team that can obviously get hot, and they've got what was it like the metric that I saw on ESPN earlier? I think nine guys who've made at least 18 threes on the season. Essentially, they were trying to depict the fact that you've got guys who can shoot it all over this VCU team, and so that would be another path to victory is if they can get going from outside. I'm not sure contesting on the perimeter is North Carolina's greatest strength either.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next one. You're dealing with the second worst 3-point shooting defense in ACC play this year, a well below average group for the full year in North Carolina. VCU was awesome shooting the three last week. They broke the 40% mark twice. They also have only broken it twice in the last 9 games. This was a team that did not shoot well down the stretch overall. So I guess we probably do need to just go into a couple of the random characters in this game because unless Vasar just completely wreaks havoc and we see a repeat of his game like he had in the loss against Clemson in the ACC quarterfinals where he goes for 25 and 17, then we're going to start looking into these random role guys and this freshman point guard battle, Nick Lewis against Derek Dixon, two super inconsistent young guys who look like young guys a lot. And if one of them can have one of their better games in this one and the other one's stuck to the bench in crunch time, that may well decide it.
two guys who, correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm sorry if the sound just went off there. I was pulling up the ESPN page, looking at North Carolina's stats. Is Derek Dixon also the Gonzaga guy who went to Gonzaga High School? Because there's a guy on this UNC roster who was high school teammates with Nick
Yeah,
Lewis.
oh yeah, I saw someone say that on Twitter the other day,
Mhm.
which
And
makes
so
this
they
even better.
exactly. And so they've got a bunch of familiarity with each other. Yeah, I'm looking at the roster right now. Yeah, Derek Dixon is a Vienna, Virginia native, and went to Gonzaga. So him and Nick were high school teammates. So that's an awesome matchup. And I'm sure they've got a lot of familiarity with each other's games that probably cancels each other out. I'm not sure, gives either an advantage here. But again, what we talked about too after that Sunday win over Dayton, like Nick Lewis, 11 rebounds in that game, 10 of them were defensive. And so I'd say that's a key that a lot of people can look for is VCU is at their best offensively when Nick Lewis is grabbing a defensive rebound and getting out and running and leading the break. And I think those will be VCU's best opportunities to, when you've got your point guard who loves to push the pace, if he can get a defensive rebound off a miss, and then VCU can get going down the floor with him being the floor general, then you can spread your shooters out to the corners. And I think that's probably the instance in which they're likely to get really good 3-point looks again against a team which has not been, has been one of the worst in the ACC at contesting on the perimeter. And I think that's going to be some of VCU's best opportunities to get out and run a little bit and to put together a 10-2 run or something like that in this game that can swing some momentum in their favor. Because I mean, every 3-point shooting team is, that relies heavily on that is streaky, right? And you alluded to it, like VCU was really good at the A10 tournament, and they had some games down the stretch of the regular season that they struggled in. But Phil Martelli has talked about that. I think that's one of the greatest strengths of this 16 out of 17 streak that VCU has got going where they ended the season winning 16 out of 17 games, that they learned to win in different ways. And they had some rock fights that they were able to pull out when they weren't shooting it well from outside and they were able to rely on their defense. And then they had some more higher scoring games where both teams got going up and down the floor and they were hitting from outside. So I think VCU is built with the versatility to win this game, in different styles. I think a lot of people, does it make you nervous how many people are picking VCU? Because I've seen that around the country. I mean, I think ESPN had a story earlier today saying that they were the most likely seed of 11 or lower throughout the whole tournament to win their first round game. They gave them a 39% chance. That's about where Ken Palm has it too. Like this game is kind of 60-40, in favor of UNC. And we were talking about it before we went on here. Like the St. Louis, Georgia line is the same as this line is. Like it's 2.5. And UNC's favored by 2.5. And so everything is telling us that it's going to be a close game and that VCU has every chance to get their first NCAA tournament win in 10 years. Does that make you nervous at all? Do you wish that they, were more of underdogs here?
I think the problem with this year's bracket is that there's just not that many great upset picks. And so you glance around, everyone hated the first four teams this year. And you get on to the 5-12 games, everyone loves all the five seeds. And so you're basically looking at a situation where it's VCU, South Florida, maybe Akron over Texas Tech. There's just not that many sexy ways to go here.
I was gonna say Akron too. That's the one that I like, and I have familiarity with South Florida because VCU obviously played them earlier in the year. They're playing Louisville. That's a
Yep.
6-11, right?
Who is also missing their best player like
Yep.
Carolina is.
Yep. Now UNC would probably be seated higher, right? If they weren't missing Caleb Wilson, and so one would think maybe that's baked into the seed a little bit. But that's definitely, and they've just lost their last two games too. I mean, what was it, a 15-point loss to Duke at Cameron to end the regular season, and then a 1-point loss to Clemson, 80-79 in the ACC quarterfinals. That makes them look a little vulnerable, and it's hard not to feel the opposite way about a VCU team that just was pretty comprehensive in winning the A10 tournament. The only, like as we discussed, the game that tested them the most was that quarterfinal game against Duquesne. And it feels like they're playing their best basketball this season, and that North Carolina is kind of faltering without their best player, and that it's the right moment for these teams to be matched up for VCU.
So I will flip that with my one last possibility I'm thinking about in this game. The door is open to a Carolina just smothering here because Lazar Djokovic coming off the worst week of his season, the A10 tournament, really being a non-factor for three games against a North Carolina group that is so good at just sealing off the rim, even without Wilson. When Vasar and Jaron Stevenson are out there together, VCU is just going to struggle to get downhill if they can't generate one-on-one baskets from Djokovic. And it does feel like this could turn into something we saw November, December. VCU started to get 3-point happy against better defenses. And it could turn into something like that NC State game here real quick, where they're just bombing away. And if VCU's shooting under 30, I'm going to say under 35% from three, and they don't have an answer for Vasar, North Carolina's probably blowing them out.
I'm with you. I certainly see that route too. I want to say that in the back half of the season that VCU to a degree fixed that issue and was able to understand, you know, games that they couldn't get 3-point happy when it wasn't falling. But I can certainly see that route if they're not hitting from outside, they're not able to penetrate. I mean, they need Terrence Hill to do what he did at the A10 tournament, right? And to be a driver that can get into the paint, hit all of the mid-range shots that he hit. Those should probably be open for him. Because so much of collapsing a defense for VCU comes off of Hill being able to penetrate with his dribble drive game. And so they're going to need him to be that, 18, 20 point leading scorer who's able to beat guys off the dribble in order to open up everything for all the other guys. Or maybe they can get going in transition, like we talked about with Nick Lewis. And pushing the tempo a little bit and being able to spread the floor a little bit that way. But I'm with you. I can certainly see that route where if, a few shots don't get in early and they get 3-point happy and they're not able to penetrate, and then Bashar is just killing them on the inside. On the other side, that's definitely the route for UNC to win this game by 10, 15 points.
Yeah, I think it's something that they do need to watch out for. But regardless, this should be a super fun game. Any other thoughts that you haven't gotten off about this matchup?
Um, Tyrell Ward, I would throw out there too. I mean, he's been such a big part of VCU's best basketball in the back half of the season. There were those long stretches earlier where he wasn't playing. And I think his resurgence has very much come in tandem with VCU's best basketball in the year. And they're going to need that bench, that was fifth nationally in bench points per game to show up. They're going to need Ward to hit a couple threes and be the defender that he was, as we talked about on Sunday, too, with 3 blocks and 3 steals in that A10 final. They're going to need him to show up. And I would be fascinated to hear Hubert Davis talk about the preparation for Hill and Bell off the bench, right? Because like Phil Martelli talked about that at length, and I was fascinated with what he said during the A10 tournament when Matt Shelton-Hyde from Ram Nation asked, like, did you really wrestle with wanting to start Terrence Hill like for long stretches this year? He was your leading scorer, analytics wise, your best offensive player. Like, did you want to put him in the starting lineup? And Phil said, no, I really never did, because I love the chess piece that is in terms of preparation. Because when you're an opposing team, a lot of the time when you're doing your walkthrough, you're talking about the starters for the other team, right? And this guy, is guarding him, and here's how we're going to work against this action. But then when you've got Hill and Bell, two of VCU's best players, coming off the bench, that throws a wrench into your preparation, right? And so with the quick turnaround here, just a few days to prepare, I would love to be a fly on the wall for those UNC walkthroughs and see how they're preparing for that, and is it sort of different plans for when Hill is on the floor and when he's not? And Phil said too that he loves to feel that angst from opposing benches when Hill is coming into the game a few minutes in, and how they're changing up their plan. And so as soon as Terrence Hill walks to that scores table, like, I'm going to look to the UNC bench and see what their reaction is. And see how their defensive scheme changes with him on the floor. So that would be another X factor. I'd be fascinated to hear from UNC what the preparation was like when VCU's best player, 2 of their best players, are coming off the bench, and this team's depth has been such a huge part of its success all year.
Yeah, and Carolina just doesn't have the bench to match either. I mean, the only one person on either team that I feel like we should have mentioned at some point is Zayden High, who's come in since the Wilson injury and shown the ability to hit some threes, grab some rebounds as one of the few people with a tiny shack on Zayden High Island. I do feel the need to bring him up real quick. But yeah, I mean, North Carolina's basically running out him and Kyan Evans and a couple of young freshmen who may not be ready for the moment. VCU's bringing their strength off the bench. So we'll see how that falls as well. But Zach Joachim, where can all the listeners find you?
My work's on richmond.com, man. Thank you so much for the plug. If you just search Zach Joachim, richmond.com, it all comes up. That's where the Times-Dispatch work is. And my Twitter is first name, last name, ZachJoachim. I always appreciate the opportunity to come on, man. You're the best. And oh, wait, can we touch on Leibovitz real quick too, and the new A10 commissioner. What are your thoughts? He spent time in the Big East, the American, everything that I've seen around the A10, and I talked to Ed McLaughlin about it at the VCU hotel earlier today too. People have had some pretty glowing stuff to say about him, and they're excited about what he means for the future of the A10.
Yeah, I got to go deeper into this. This is like a 2 weeks from now project, but the amount of well wishes and this was a great hire comments by really important people was so kind of such an onslaught that at one point in the day, I actually found myself wanting to see someone say something bad about him.
Yeah,
Just because I was starting to wonder how it was possible that, oh, John Calipari and Dana O'Neill, and there were some glowing quotes from Rick Barnes that were floating around the other day. They either just hit an absolute grand slam or my God, this guy is good at getting people to kiss up to him.
and one of the things that stood out from Ed when I talked to him about it, man, Ed McLaughlin, who's the athletic director at VCU, was talking about player retention and about how he felt, Leibowitz was the right guy to keep the best players in the A10 in the A10, right? Because I think, people aren't ready to turn to and talk about VCU's offseason yet, but as soon as they do lose, they will be. And obviously, one of the places that you have to start are keeping a Terrence Hill and a Nick Lewis. Who were two guys who had phenomenal seasons for this year, underclassmen guards who've still got a lot of college basketball to play ahead of them. And those kind of guys you got to be able to keep in this league, right? And to be able to put the brand of the A10 on the stage that when those guys have seasons like that, they're not looking to make a jump to a power conference. And Ed seemed pretty bullish on Leibovitz's ability to put the A10 in a position to keep those kinds of players. Obviously, NIL resources are a big part of that. But league branding, league scheduling are also huge parts of it. And so I'm excited to see what the future for the conference holds under his leadership.
Yeah, it seems like this might be a good move, but like I said, we'll dig in the future. I think he's having a press conference next week, so I'm really fascinated to hear the vision he lays out because even if this guy is amazing, a bad vision is going to sink his tenure real quick. And the flip side as well. If he's got great ideas, then I'm good with a lesser candidate. But we'll see. We'll see. That'll be the most fascinating kind of first off-season story here. But Zach, thank you for joining me.
79-77 VCU, Terrence Hill free throw line jumper, shades of Eric Maynor against Duke. Book it.
You're the first. This is the eighth one of these I've done this week. You're the first person to yell out a prediction at the end. So we're gonna get to see if you're right.
It was a 6-11 with VCU and Duke in 2007, I think, right? When Maynor hit that shot. So I don't know. The 11 seed has been kind to VCU in the past. Haven't won an NCAA tournament game in 10 years. Um, Maybe they can break that spell and the 11 can continue to be magic for the Rams, man. Tyler, thank you for having me on. You're the best.
Yeah, just don't remind the Duke fans that VCU won that game.
Yeah, then they might not cheer for him.